And welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Saturdays Rewritten here on YouTube or your favorite podcast listening platform. Today, I am joined by Gerald Goodridge of Longhorn Republic. They've got a podcast and whatnot, and they're going to tell us everything we need to know about the Texas Longhorns this year and their upcoming season. Obviously, a big game this Saturday. Gerald, how you doing? Thanks so much for joining the show.
Yeah, hopefully I can live up to that expectation. Everything feels like a high praise, but no, I'm good, man. I'm good. Like, it's a long weekend full of college sports. I've got 2 cookouts on the schedule, so like, you can't really want anything else.
And that's exactly right. A top 3 matchup coming to us this Saturday. Thank goodness. This is just the second matchup in AP history pitting top 3 ranked teams against one another in the season opener. Obviously, last year, Ohio State defeats Texas 28-14 in the college football playoff semifinal to even the all-time series at 2-2. For some reason, I thought y'all had played a little bit more than that, but no. I digress. And now, obviously, Texas coming in with a quarterback by the name of Arch Manning. You may have heard of him. Already a Heisman betting favorite, and he's about to make his first career collegiate road start. So, Gerald, let me ask you, what's kind of your overall thought of this game? Just kind of your initial reaction to this matchup.
Yeah, it's such a hard game to call. Like, that's why Vegas has been right. That I've seen the line go 1.5, 2.5 points kind of sit in that realm, because I don't think anybody knows really what either of these teams have. Like, we know there's a ton of talent. These are 2 teams that have recruited at a top 3, top 5-ish level for, 4 or 5 years, and stacking classes like that is how you start to build a dynasty, even in this transfer portal era. And so both teams are highly, built from the ground up with a lot of their recruiting. It's not a ton of transfer. Texas really went heavy in the transfer portal in the interior of the defensive line. But outside of that, like, it's all been guys who have been around for multiple years in Austin. And it's weird. I was looking at like returning production, and these 2 teams are effectively like a mirror image of each other. Both return 9 starters, right? Ohio State has 3 on offense, 6 on defense. Texas has 6 on defense, 3 on off, right? So it's just there are these weird mirror images of each other. And so, like, it's just exciting. There's a lot of anxiety. Anxiety's not the right word, but there's that, like, that butterflies feeling that you have before big games. I think the thing that both teams are not leaning on, but understand, is that this is a marquee game. You obviously want to come out and win it. You obviously want to come out and look good. But either of these teams, if they have national championship aspirations, you don't have to put like the entire season on this matchup, right? Because if either of these teams lose but go out and win their conference, they're in the national championship picture, likely with a bye week starting the playoffs. So there is that level of, like, yes, it's a big game. Yes, you want to win them all. Yes, you want to go out and acquit yourself well. But ultimately, like, when you think about the Big Ten and the SEC, those are 2 conferences that if you go through, and even as a 1-loss champion, right? I wouldn't be shocked to see either of these teams, in the college football playoff as a 10-2 conference champion or an 11-1 conference champion. So there's a lot of excitement. There's a lot of, confidence, I think, on both sides. And, I think it's going to be a tight one, and I'm excited to watch it.
Right there with you as kind of an unbiased, third-party fan. When I saw this matchup on the schedule, first and foremost, fantastic. Before we dive into the X's and O's and whatnot, what were your thoughts on Texas rejecting Ohio State's offer on, hey, do you want a night game on Sunday?
It's such a weird, like, it depends, your opinion on it depends on, like, who's framing you buy into, right? Because Ohio State's like, Texas doesn't want to play a night in Columbus. I'm like, there are Texas fans that bought plane tickets for this 9 months ago. Their hotel rooms have been booked. They're flying out Sunday morning. And so not only for, like, the on-field, Texas doesn't want the short, weird week, but really for the Texas fans that are going, I think the athletic department honestly owed it to them to not, like, throw up and say, hey, I know you bought tickets. I know you spent a mortgage payment on tickets. I know you spent hundreds and hundreds of dollars on plane tickets and non-refundable hotel rooms at this point. So, like, from a fan's perspective, I appreciate that Texas kind of stood their ground and said, no, we're not going to shift it, because I have friends that are going up to Columbus that would have been out hundreds and thousands of dollars if this game had shifted from Saturday to Sunday. So we talk about college football going away from like what's best for the fans in a lot of ways. And so this was refreshing to me to see, a school say like, hey, this isn't only not good for competition, but it's not great for our fans either. And so we're going to stick to where we're at.
Fair enough. I like that. Okay, so speaking of this game, a little bit of backstory to the folks listening. You mentioned the Buckeyes are a 1.5 favorite for this game. One thing critics of Manning are pointing to is that, or maybe not critics, just like, hey, let's settle down, as Manning did win a pair of games for the Longhorns as a starter last year, but both came at home versus teams that were combined 7-17 last year. And then at Ohio State, since Ryan Day took over as head coach in 2019, Ohio State is 37-3 straight up in home games, which trails only Alabama at 38 for the most home wins in college football. Taking all of those numbers into consideration and whatnot, what do you look at offensively, maybe from Coach Sarkisian with Arch Manning, understanding that this is a different beast that, Arch is going to be running into here?
Yeah, and I think Sark has the advantage of having done this 2 years in a row before, right? 2 years ago, Texas went to Alabama and snapped Nick Saban's home non-conference win streak and his non-conference. So like Texas has done that, and then last year they went to Michigan. Granted, Michigan wasn't nearly as good as either that Alabama team a couple years ago or what Ohio State's going to trot out there. But Sark has been in his coaching staff. There's been a ton of continuity. They've been in this position before, and so he said it in his Monday press conference. We're just going to prepare the same way we have in these spots before and trust our level of preparation. So that, I think, is a right way to think about it. There are coaches that, I think of, there are coaches that I really like, this is a huge game. Urban Meyer is like one of one, and coaches that could really do that and not see a fall off. But the vast majority of coaches that do well in this spot are like, hey, we're gonna prep this like we always prep it. We maybe have some more crowd noise during practice. Hey, we may do some different scramble drills and things like that. But ultimately, we're gonna go through the same routines. We're gonna go through the same preparation process, and that's been successful for Sark and company over the last 4 years. The first year didn't go great, but since then, really things have been spinning in the right direction. So offensively, when you talk about that, the reason why I feel okay about Texas's chances is because I feel like Texas is built in a way that, especially offensively, that's going to allow for them to mitigate some of the natural advantage that I think Ohio State has in the matchup of defensive line versus offensive line. This is going to be this unit's first time together as an offensive line unit. Yeah, they've played some, sparsely, and yeah, they've played together as a unit in some garbage time, but like it's different, right? And so being the offensive line, it takes routine, it takes rhythm, it takes just familiarity with the guys in front of you. But Steve Sarkisian really loves to run inside zone and really loves to run two tight ends. And so being able to, the best part of Texas's offensive line this year is going to be from guard to guard, in my opinion. Like just looking at who they have and the personnel. And that's kind of a question mark for folks in the Ohio State universe is like, hey, who's going to be that interior defensive line? So Texas has two really solid blocking tight ends that they're going to have out there. So I wouldn't be shocked to see Texas using a lot of 12 personnel, two tight ends, one running back, and really pounding inside zone, especially with the news that CJ Baxter, the running back, is healthy, right? That was a big question throughout the offseason. Will CJ Baxter be there? And this is no shot at Quintravian Weisner, who carried a lot of water for Texas last year. 1,000-yard rusher, three-star kid, right? Three-star kid from DeSoto, lost his job in high school, thought they were going to pull his scholarship, came in, made a name for himself. That kid deserves to never buy another drink or meal in Austin, period. But he's not an inside zone kind of guy. That's just not his game. And we saw when Texas couldn't run inside zone last year, the offense sputtered. And so Texas being able to lean on that not only leans into the advantages I think they may have in some spots, but it ultimately, if they can get it going, takes pressure off the quarterback to play, to be the end-all be-all guy in there. And so I think that's why I feel okay about Texas. I feel good about their ability to run inside zone, to run between the tackles, especially in a too tight set, which then lets Arch be able to have some pressure off himself and ultimately throw those deep shots that he likes to throw on a play action, trying to take advantage of folks cheating up to stop the run.
Now, you just mentioned the deep shots on play action there. Tell me about the Longhorns wide receiver group. Who obviously you guys lose a ton of talent to the draft this last year. So who's going to be the guy? Who are the guys that fans at home should really be keying in on as we look at this matchup?
Yeah, so Texas was really excited about Emmett Mosley. He came in; he was a transfer from the fledgling Pac-12 or whatever we're calling it now. But he's actually going to be sidelined for this game. So Texas is going to lean on a couple of guys that maybe are unproven but really talented. You've got Ryan Wingo, who's one of the fastest guys in the conference. He's also like 6'2", so he's like big and fast, which is a thing that Steve Sarkisian likes. DeAndre Moore is a guy in the slot that I'm actually like madly in love with, and like the most normal way I could say that. I love the way the kid instinctively knows how to track the ball in the air. If you want to look at like why folks are high on Arch Manning, go watch the Mississippi State game from last year. There was a slot fade he threw to DeAndre Moore, and it was just like they were reading each other's minds, right? So like that, big fan of DeAndre Moore and his game and just the way he plays that slot position. I think people are going to see a lot of Parker Livingstone, and he is a guy who folks haven't really heard a ton about thus far. He's been more of a developmental guy, but he is way stinking faster than folks have assumed he is. For various reasons. You can Google his image and figure out why people think he's not a fast wide receiver. But ultimately, like Parker Livingston is a guy who folks have a lot of confidence in with, mostly being sidelined. He's probably going to slot in behind him. So those are three names. Also, Jack Endries as a tight end was a transfer, again, from, I believe, Stanford. And it's going to be a big target. When you think about young quarterbacks and their ability to get comfortable, having a good tight end is your best friend. And so Jack Endries is a guy who I think Arch is going to look at for a check down and look for those 5-yard outs to get a first down. Again, there's talent. There's not a lot of production.
Right. And, the one thing I've noticed from both, probably from the more normie fan, I guess you could say, for both of these teams is that, nobody on these teams is coming back from last year except a few star guys. Well, actually, both Ohio State and Texas, y'all are both returning a lot of guys who maybe weren't starters from last year, but they have a lot of game time experience coming into this one. On offense and defense, let's open up both sides. Who are some guys that maybe were starting to peak through last year, but you really think are going to punch through to be kind of some mainstays for this season?
Yeah, so I mentioned a couple of them. Ryan Wingo was a guy who had some big plays, but was kind of a gadget guy last year just because true freshman still learning the offense, but he's such a dynamic playmaker. You get the ball in his hands somehow, try to get him into space and have him make somebody miss. I think he's a guy that you're going to really see a lot out of this year. A lot of that's going to be, I think, in the offensive line where you've got a guy like Connor Stroh who played some spots last year, but he's actually looking like he's going to be one of the starting guards. He is a 6'7". He folks are calling him. They're comparing him to Tormund from Game of Thrones, like this big, massive redheaded guy who's going to hold down one of the guard spots. So those guys, like I said, Connor Stroh. You're going to see Nito Umazulu is a guy who's going to rotate in at guard as well. Trevor Gooseby is a player that I think folks are going to really have a lot to say about at the end of the year. He was the guy who subbed in for Kelvin Banks last year at left tackle when Banks went down with an injury, and he didn't really see much of a demonstrable fall off from what Banks, did in those previous games. So he's a guy who could, kind of step in and start. On the defensive side of the ball, I think Jalen Gilbo's a guy who folks are going to see a lot of. Jalen Gilbo's going to move inside and outside depending on at the corner spot, depending on where folks are playing. I think the one guy that I really want people to lock in on is Ethan Burke. He plays, everybody focuses on Colin Simmons on the Texas defensive line, and rightfully so. But I've kind of said this on record and multiple times. I think Ethan Burke is going to have a really big year because people are focusing so much on Colin Simmons. Colin Simmons is such a gravitational player. Folks are going to shade coverage away from him. Oh, then you've got this 6'5", 6'6" lacrosse player on the other side with gorilla arms who's able to just like reach out and maul people. So he's going to be able to take advantage of that quite a bit. So those are some names to think about. I'm sure I could go on for another hour about that, but those are a few off the top of my head.
Fair enough. Well, there you go, folks. So now focusing to Texas's defense, last year I was just thoroughly impressed by the defensive side of the ball with Texas, even bringing up the Ohio State game where, y'all maybe lost by a couple of scores, an unfortunate turnover towards the end there. But the defense did a phenomenal job bracketing Jeremiah Smith and just the year in general. For over a decade after Mac Brown and whatnot, Texas, the word that came to mind for me was soft. Not anymore, not with this new administration and under Sark and whatnot. So the defensive line in particular, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but y'all brought in 5 new defensive linemen in the offseason. What's kind of your overall sense there? I know you just mentioned a couple of them. What's kind of your sense for this defense? Is it still going to be that same hard-hitting, flying around the field kind of team?
Yeah, I don't think the personality or the mentality of the defense is going to change all that much. One of the advantages that Texas had is that when you see teams that are really heavy on turnovers, it's usually like a lot of fumble luck. But Texas was a heavy interception team last year, but 10 of those interceptions are now playing in the NFL, right? Jahdae Barron and Andrew Makuba are both gone. So that's an area I think to watch and kind of monitor. They've got a lot of talent back there. As far as your question about the line, you can always tell with Texas the area that the coaching staff feels the shakiest on going into the season, because it's where they allocate most, if not all, of their NIL budget. And again, they brought in, I think, 7 or 8 player. I think it's probably 9, if memory serves, portal players, and 5 of them were defensive tackles. So that's a spot that they really, wanted to shore up. And I say that kind of with a grain of salt, because my favorite pastime over the last 3 off seasons has been wondering who the next Texas defensive tackle is going to be, because they've put guys in the league year after year after year, where they've had last year, they had 2 guys drafted from the defensive tackle position. The year before, they had 2 guys drafted in the defensive tackle position. The year before that, they had 1 guy drafted, 1 guy signed as the undrafted free agent. So they have the developmental chops to get the guys where they need to go. And it's a very friendly defense for a space eater type of defensive tackle. You don't need to be a big dynamic playmaker. Your big behind needs to occupy 2 blockers and give Texas a numbers advantage. That's all you need to do. So you've got guys like Cole Brevard and Travis Shaw who've come in and really been that big body in the middle, where I can grab a center, I can grab a guard, and then let Anthony Hill be the star, then let Leonga Leifau behind him be the star, right? So that, to me, is what Texas is trying to do in aggregate, right? They're going to try to moneyball together some of this situation in the defensive tackle. So the edges, you don't really need. I already talked about it a bit, but like Colin Simmons is like a one-of-one kind of player. Like, you have to build around him. Ethan Burke on the other side. One of my buddies coaches high school football in the state of Texas, and he played against Ethan Burke. Was texting us on game day like, "Hey, Burke is murdering us right now. I'm glad Texas was able to grab him." So it's just. I feel good about that front 6 unit. Again, the 4 defensive linemen. Anthony Hill, again, is another one-of-one type player. If you're a guy who likes watching good linebackers play and be explosive and disruptive, he's a guy for you. You're going to love him. He's got some room to grow in the pass coverage thing. He's honestly, when he gets to the NFL, will likely probably like spin down closer to the line just based on his skill set. But he's one of the best linebackers in the country, and I just love watching him.
Well, there you go. Now, we obviously have to talk about Arch. So I loved Quinn Ewers and what he did for Texas. You can argue that he helped kind of cement Texas as being back and whatnot. Oh, yeah. No doubt in my mind. But for me, when I watched Arch play last year, y'all's red zone numbers went up. The deep shot, yes, it led to some mistakes. No doubt. He's a young kid. But I feel like Quinn was a little bit safe. I think his yards down the field averaged around 5, and then Arch is up over 7. To me, Arch makes the Texas offense feel that much more dangerous. He's got that dual threat ability. Am I kind of off feeling as though the Texas offense is about to hit a different ceiling this year?
Yeah, I there's 2 parts of that conversation. There's like the Quinn Ewers part of the conversation, and then the Arch Manning part of the conversation. Because there are folks that are wondering, like, if Arch is so good, why didn't he start over Quinn Ewers, right? It's not a tired take; it's an understandable take based upon the fact that Arch Manning was a one-of-one kind of recruit, where he was top ranked, and I think he was perfectly rated at one point, and may have been at the end of his cycle. But it wasn't a physical thing with Arch Manning. The Steve Sarkisian's offense asks a lot of its quarterback, and if you go back and watch Texas's win in the playoffs against Arizona State, that 4th and 13 touchdown was Quinn Ewers calling an audible, right? He checked to that play. That was not the call that came in the huddle. And that's the type of thing. It's the reason why you have a 3rd-year starter and you don't replace them with a redshirt freshman, because he's able to see that, he calls that, he throws the right ball, and Texas ultimately wins that game and then plays Ohio State. So like, that to me is part of the conversation. But when you think about what Arch brings to the offense, Sark did have to scheme around a lot of what Quinn Ewers was able to do and deliver it based on not just his arm strength, but his injury history. He played most of last year with a torn labrum, and so he wasn't able to deliver the ball, as well as he could. And if you go back, I would challenge everybody, go back and watch his first start against Alabama in Texas where he gets injured. Watch him before that, and then watch him in the games following, and you'll see two very different quarterbacks. But ultimately, you're right. Like, with what Arch is able to do now, Texas will be able to push the ball down the field. Texas will be able to take a lot more of those vertical shots because he's got the arm strength, and he doesn't have multiple shoulder injuries that are limiting his ability to do so. And Sark has never been a run my quarterback kind of guy because, the quarterback is such a vital part of running his offense. So you're not going to see, he's not going to like switch it to a zone read like Rich Rod in 2004 kind of situation with Arch, but defenses do have to respect the kid's ability to pull the ball down and run. And so it's going to cause corners to play things a little bit different. It's going to cause linebackers to do different things in coverage, especially in zone coverage where, Arch is going to be able to pull it down. Or in man coverage, they're not, I anticipate teams playing less man coverage against Texas than they did a year ago because of the wheels of Arch Manning. So there's a lot of what his game changes about what folks are able to do.
Well, fair enough. So let's zoom out a little bit to Texas's season as a whole. So obviously, game 1 against Ohio State, everyone knows about that one. Then you got 3 weeks of kind of tune-up schedule before you dive right into the deep end. I think Florida is going to be a really solid team this year, and it's at the Swamp. Never an easy place to go, even if Florida's on a downwards trend. Then you got Oklahoma. As a Washington State guy, breaks my heart to see John Mateer down in Oklahoma, and Ben Arbuckle, his offensive coordinator, follows him. I think Oklahoma's going to be a lot bigger of a challenge this year. Then you kind of, no SEC game is super easy, but then you got Kentucky, Mississippi State, Vanderbilt, which is a different Vandy than years past. And then you got at Georgia. And then to wrap things up, it's Arkansas. And then, of course, Texas A&M, which also they're in an upward trend. So looking at this schedule, what is kind of your overall take on this schedule? I hear some SEC fans going on about how this is an easy schedule compared to others. And I'm just sitting here like, that's all relative. The SEC is just brutal any way you slice it, really. What's your kind of overall take on this schedule?
Yeah, I think it's, I'll say last year's was easier because they had Florida at home and they had, they had Georgia at home, and Georgia eviscerated Texas in that game. So that didn't end up mattering. But, this is why I'm a proponent of like the undefeated conference champion is like a thing of the past. There's just so much parity in college football. And so, playing Florida, first SEC game on the road. If this was the first big road test, like Ohio State almost inoculates them a little bit from the terror of the Swamp. But again, the Swamp is going to be the Swamp, and it's going to be wild and soupy, and those fans are going to be well lubricated and ready to go. So that back-to-back of like Florida, Oklahoma, and even Kentucky fans, they really need a win. And so if they can come in and acquit themselves well, it's going to be interesting. I think my predictions, I have Texas at 10-2 this year, still competing for an SEC championship. Because I think, again, the SEC is going to be not as wide open, or not as predetermined as it was before. I think there are probably 3 or 4 teams that'll be, legitimate contenders. I've got, Texas, Georgia, Alabama in that rung, right? And probably Florida, depending on DJ Lagway's health. So ultimately, I think, this is not, I wouldn't call it an easy schedule, because anytime you have to go to the Swamp, into Georgia and Athens in the same year, it's not going, those are 2 of the hardest places. Plus then you've got non-conference game against Ohio State. Like, those are 3 of the toughest places to play in the stinking country. So it's hard for me to say like, oh, this is an easy schedule. Now, I mean, it's not out of the realm to say that like, yeah, having Kentucky, Mississippi State, and Vandy between OU and Georgia isn't a bit of a like, hey, take a breath, but still, like, it's the SEC, going to Kentucky, going to Mississippi off of what's, a neutral site game and then a road game. Like, Texas is not going to have a home game from September 20th all the way through to November 1st, right? They're going to go a whole month without playing in their home stadium. So that is like a thing that you have to keep in the back of your head. Like, those are, those types of, the airline miles build up on your body.
Oh, 100%. The Texas OU rivalry, zooming in a little bit on that one of my favorite rivalries in all of college football. I really love the balance and the rivalry too. Both teams are oftentimes really dang good and both have national championship aspirations. Oklahoma, obviously last year, took a bit of a nosedive. Jackson Arnold just kind of fell off a cliff there. A lot of injuries and whatnot. This year, I expect, in theory, of course, I expect Oklahoma to be a little bit better, maybe a little bit more dangerous. What's your overall take on the Red River rivalry?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I don't want to like speak out of turn, and I know you're a Washington State guy. I'll believe the Mateer hype when I see it. I'm a little bit of a Mateer truther. Just looking at his like games against Power 5 teams versus some of the other Pac-12 schools. I'm not denying his talent. I'm not denying his ability. I playing it week in, week out in the SEC is just different than what he played last year. I'm not denying his talent and his connection with Ben Arbuckle. Like, I think that offense is going to be dangerous. I don't think the quarterback was the problem last year, though. I think their offensive line sucked, and I think that they didn't have a healthy wide receiver all year. And so they did Jackson Arnold a bit of a disservice. And, sometimes you need a fresh start, even if it's not your fault. And so I'm curious to see what he does in Auburn. So to me, like, folks are, heaping on Jackson Arnold. They really need to be heaping on Bill Bedenbaugh being behind the times. He was very hesitant to play the NIL game. He's very hesitant to go transfer portal heavy, and it showed for a couple of years. And so that to me is something to keep an eye on. Did OU, plug the hole? They're starting a true freshman at left tackle, Michael Fasusi. Now he's good. I wanted him at Texas. I'm not throwing shade, but playing left tackle against Colin Simmons as a true freshman in your first time in the Red River rivalry is going to be a thing, right? It's just a thing you have to keep an eye on. So it's going to be a good game. OU's going to have a defense, right? It's a Brent Venables team. The defense is going to be great. Can the offense catch up? The defense is going to be good. If the offense is average, if they're not a dumpster fire like they were last year, they're going to be a good team. I don't know what good looks like for them, but ultimately, if with the level of defense that Venables is going to bring to the table, if we get and again, I think some of the, Heisman talk about, I've seen people say John Mateer for Heisman and those types of things. Like, I think we need to pump the brakes a little on that. But if we get 70% of what folks expect from John Mateer, I think OU is going to be really good this year.
There you go, folks. Red River rivalry. Tune in. Okay. Last question before we kind of wrap up here. Do you believe in the Arch Manning for Heisman hype? Is that blown out of proportion? What are your thoughts there?
I think sportsbook are trying to make money on somebody's name. Like I kind of I hedge my bets a little bit. I'm not a bettor, but I'm hedging my bets on the conversation. If Arch is as good as we think he is, and if Texas is as good as everybody predicts that they're going to be this year, then Arch will likely be in New York at the end of the year, right? But I also think that it's unfair to expect a first-time starter who has to go to the Horseshoe, has to go to the Swamp, who has to go to Athens between the hedges, right, to be the best quarterback in the country. It's just an unfair expectation for people. Now, there's all sorts of, well, he was the best-rated recruit and blah, 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 and all the hype. Like, he didn't ask for any of that. He's not the one that's out there seeking it. His parents intentionally kind of skewed some of that and was like, hey, we want this to be a 1980s style recruitment. Everything goes to the coach. We're not doing all these crazy visits. He's going to commit one time. We're going to, like, all of the things that he's done has been at the attempt to push off some of these expectations, to push off some of the hype, right? He didn't really he had an NIL deal his freshman year that went to charity, right? He did a rookie card signing with Topps, and that all that money went to charity. And then he kind of just sat back and learned. He sat back and held the clipboard. And so it's almost unfair to him for this level of like, he's going to be the guy, and he's the greatest thing since sliced bread, because he's actively tried to mitigate as much of that as he can. And so do I think he's going to be very good? Yes, I think Arch Manning is going to be very good. I think he's very advanced for what we're going to see from a third-year sophomore, redshirt sophomore. But also being, the odds-on Heisman favorite, I think is too much dip on your chip. I think it's just too much too soon. I'm of a thought that, like, I think honestly this might be the year before the year for Texas in a lot of ways, where I think Arch will likely have that big Heisman level season next year because the offensive line will be better, the running backs will be better, they'll have more rhythm with these young wide receivers. So I think this could be like the year before the year. And I think expecting Arch to, again, as I've said off top, if Texas meets these expectations, folks have got national championship kind of penciled in next to Texas in a lot of ways. So if Texas gets to that point, then Arch probably is in New York because he needs to play at that level.
Fair enough. To your point, is kind of the sense around, Texas, it's championship or bust for the Longhorns this year?
I don't think it's championship or bust, but I think folks expect them to be competitive again. I think, folks want Texas to be good. Texas fans have, dealt with being the butt of jokes and being terrible for, a long time. And so I think folks think Texas is going to be very good. And it's hard for me to say that Texas fans think it's championship or bust. I think a lot of folks have high hopes for this team and high expectations for this team. But I also think that ball knowers, to pull that stupid cliche, I think folks that actually know what's going on are like, hey, this is going to be a good team, but expecting them to win a national championship with all of the question marks. I think part of what goes into the expectations for Texas is that most of the teams in the country that are expected to be good have those same question marks, right? Ohio State, a lot of turnover, a lot of guys in the NFL, new quarterback, right? The only team that really doesn't have that, teams that don't have that, are Clemson and Penn State. So there are a lot of teams, and so Texas benefits from all these other teams have questions, and Texas has recruited and developed the way that they did. So to answer your question, I don't think it's championship or bust for Texas and a lot of Texas fans, but I do think if Texas isn't competitive, if that A&M game isn't a, hey, win and you're in the SEC championship type of situation, I think Texas fans will be disappointed.
Fair enough. Yeah. I think I listened to a Georgia podcast that was discussing how there's probably 30 or so teams across the country that if things go right, they could be in the college football playoff and making a push for the national championship game. We've just
100%.
never seen this kind of parity in college football before. And a lot of that is thanks in part to the NIL era. So some pros and cons on that end. But
Sure.
Gerald, thanks so much for your time. Where can people follow you and find your work?
Yeah, so I'm on both Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it, and Blue Sky. You can catch me personally at GH Goodridge. It's mostly dumb comic stuff, and then I make fun of my kids. You can check the podcast out at Longhorn Pod, both of those places as well. We're on every podcast service you can find, Longhorn Republic. We're also part of the Dave Campbell's Texas Football Podcast Network, so if you can't remember Longhorn Pod, everybody knows Dave Campbell's Texas Football, so check them out. We're part of their podcast network.
Oh, fantastic. Gerald, thanks again, and thank goodness college football is back.
Been too long.